MLS opening weekend is this weekend. All teams are in action. And Tony, yesterday you gave us your superlatives. Later on, you're going to give us your way too early top 10 power rankings. But really, what are you looking forward to the most in this season?
Well, the start of the season, right, always brings a little bit of hope to everybody, right? And this year, I shouldn't say unlike the last couple of years, because we have had new managers. We've got, 8 or 9 new managers in the league, which always brings a new spice to the league and new ideas to the league. We saw up in Vancouver, no one knew who Jasper Sorensen was a year ago, and he became one of the highlights of last season. So, of course, new players coming into the league. There's been some interleague trades that have been really, that I think will make a big difference for some teams. So I love the start of the season. Everyone knows I love the league. I've been in it since 1996 and been involved in it. So that's I'm looking at. I love how we've evolved. Yeah. Whether it's stadiums, whether it's players, whether it's rules in our league, it's evolved in every way that you can think of. So it's always an exciting time for me this time of year.
Now, part of the way that this league is evolving is that this is going to be the last traditional spring to fall season. They're going to change to more of that European schedule starting next year. So is there anything in particular that you're looking at in this last traditional season?
Yeah, I don't know that it changes much this year, this time around. I think when we'll see the changes when we finally get on that international calendar, how we activate the transfer market, right? And how we're active in the transfer market, which owners are going to spend big, which owners are laying off a little bit, because there's so many different ways to build teams. But yeah, we'll get through this one. This will look very similar. Of course, the big wrinkle this time around is we're going to have a World Cup in our country, right? And of course, Mexico and Canada as well. But how it affects Major League Soccer. Teams will take off for a couple of weeks. We've not had that, especially being here. So we're going to ramp up some excitement. Can we carry that over to the second part of the season? That's all the things that Major League Soccer is working on. But again, this is a fun time of the year. This is when everyone has hope that they're going to win an MLS Cup.
Everyone has hope. This is when your team that maybe starts with like an A or a B or a D is at the top of the table, because it all resets in alphabetical order. And hey, that looks pretty good for my DC United team going into this season. But let's bring another voice into the conversation. Paul Tenorio is joining us. Paul, we've been speaking about the evolution of MLS. What are some changes that we'll be seeing this year?
Well, I think actually a lot of it isn't visible yet. These teams are preparing for the summer of 2027, that transfer window when you can be more active in what is the most active transfer window globally. MLS is going to have a chance to compete for players that they normally wouldn't have a chance to bid on or to sign. But there's a lot left to be done for MLS to make that window of 2027 as effective as it can be. A lot of these teams are waiting to see how the rules might change. So I think right now this year you might see some teams being a little bit cautious. I would also say, as Tony alluded to, the World Cup coming this summer, there are some teams waiting for the summer of 2026 window because they want to be able to take advantage of the World Cup bounce and maybe make a big splash after the tournament to try to seize on some of the excitement and momentum coming off of the World Cup.
Paul, Tony spoke about it. There's 9 head coaching changes here in MLS coming into this season. What are some of the new faces that we'll be seeing, and maybe some managers that you think will be having the most success this year?
Yeah, I'm talking to a lot of people around the league. Henrik Rydstrom in Columbus came up time and time again as a coach that they think is going to do really well in Columbus. They said it's very difficult to replace a manager like Wilfried Nancy, who was seen as the best coach in MLS over the last couple of years. But there's a belief in the league that Rydstrom's style of play, the way he has operated, fits so well with what they had before that they were surprised that they were able to find a manager with that kind of pedigree that can come in and make the transition much easier from what had been the top coach in the league. I'm very interested also to see how Marko Mitrovic does in New England. I got to know him very well here in Chicago. He was an assistant under Veljko Paunovic with the Chicago Fire, obviously went with the U.S. youth national teams, and now is going to go into a team that's moving on from Caleb Porter. We see the influence of working in the national teams, the youth national teams. He signed several players that he's worked with the U20s and the 23s. So Marko Mitrovic is another one I'm keeping an eye on. But yeah, it is very interesting because there have been so many changes from last season to this one. There are a lot of new coaches to keep an eye on. Yoann Damet, there's just so many that could change the way teams function and play.
Yeah, Paul, I think Marco up at the Revolution is going to have a pretty good season. That's a decent roster up there. But I want to stay on managers. I'm excited about Michael Bradley going to the Red Bulls. I personally don't think that guys, it's sort of in his stature, old national team players get enough opportunities in the league and get the pathway that he has. How do you think he'll do? Because it's been a Red Bull side that hasn't always, well, I guess I should say in the recent past, post Thierry Henry, hasn't always spent the most amount of money to support their managers.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's gotten to know Michael over the years as a player knew that this moment was going to come, right? Where he was going to be a manager. Obviously, his relationship with his dad, Bob Bradley, who's such a successful manager, both the U.S. and in MLS, and overseas as well, for that matter. Michael's always had kind of the feel and the mentality of becoming a coach afterwards. And I've always thought he's going to be a successful one. And I do think he's going to find success at Red Bull. I think it's interesting, too. It's not just what the support looks like from Red Bull Global, but also, do they dictate or mandate a style of play for Michael Bradley? That the Red Bull system is something that they like to have, because when you're scouting globally and everyone plays the same way within your kind of global network, it makes it much easier to put players in New York versus Salzburg versus down in Brazil. Do they allow Michael Bradley to branch away from that a little bit and play some soccer? I think Michael Bradley ideally would like to have more of the ball versus playing against the ball, and we'll see how that balances out with Red Bull this year. But this is another club, Red Bull New York, where I'm interested to see, as the league shifts, as it moves into the 27 season, with the calendar flip coming, if the roster rules change, maybe Red Bull is saying, okay, we want to spend a little bit more money. I'm not sure that that's going to happen this year, but I would keep an eye on how Red Bull reacts to the rule changes in the league. I think a lot of ownership groups, once the rules are loosened, will say, okay, if we can spend money the way we want to versus the way you guys dictate that we do, we'll be more willing to do it.
Now, we'll be seeing a lot of new faces, a lot of players returning, players leaving, players moving from club to club. Speaking about the new players, the new faces that we'll be seeing in MLS this season, who are some of the biggest stars that we'll be seeing in MLS this season, and who could be maybe the breakout star of the year?
Yeah, I think Berterame in Miami is probably the biggest signing of the offseason. An established number 9. He had a lot of success in Liga MX. He comes into the best team in the league and makes them stronger. So when you see a move like that, I think it speaks to the ambition of Inter Miami. And they did that all offseason as well. Mikael at center back, Dane St. Clair at goalkeeper. They strengthened the weaknesses of last year's MLS Cup winning squad. So that's one name I expect to kind of have a big breakout season this year in MLS. The other one I want to keep an eye on is in Chicago. Mbokazi and Mbokazi, a center back from South Africa, maybe one of the most popular players in MLS that we don't know about. The Fire have seen a huge bounce in popularity. He is enormously popular in South Africa. He had an awesome African Cup of Nations. He's a smaller center back, but very impressive profile. Played well in preseason. I talked to teams that saw him play, the way he was able to match up with some of the more athletic guys in MLS. A name maybe we don't know about right now, but could be a center back and a defender that we're talking about by the end of the season. So those are two names kind of on different sides of the spectrum. One, big DP number 9 striker. The other, maybe a lesser known center back, but both guys who I think are going to make two teams better. And I think the Chicago Fire could be a team that sneaks up and surprises us this year.
Yeah, Paul, I think they're going to be sneaky. By the way, his agent was not happy with him. They thought he should be in Europe, and he actually said he wanted to be in Chicago, of all places, right? So they must have courted him pretty well there, Paul. I think they're going to be sneaky good this year.
Yeah, I was really impressed with him. I'm working on a story about him actually for The Athletic, and went to the press conference where he was introduced, and he was very, very confident in the way he spoke about his career, understanding that sometimes the next best step is maybe a smaller step than what everyone else wants. Everyone always says, go to the biggest club, go to Europe right away. You have so much talent. And he recognized that MLS was going to be a step up for him. It was going to challenge him, and it was moving him out of his comfort zone, right? From South Africa to Chicago. I thought the Fire were very smart. They signed another young South African, so that he could have a little bit of camaraderie to ease that transition. And I think that speaks to Greg Berhalter understanding what it takes to kind of give a player the best chance to be successful as they push their ceiling up, right? They move to the next level. This is a player I think could go to Europe. Probably pretty close to being ready for maybe smaller European leagues. we don't see center backs of his stature very often in the biggest leagues. But again, the way he defended in the African Cup of Nations, the way he's looking so far, I mean, this is a proving ground to say, yes, I might be a shorter center back, but for as many teams that now play in a back three or back five, however you want to think about it, a left-footed center back is always a top commodity. So he's definitely one worth keeping an eye on this season.
Paul, along with all the new faces that we'll be seeing in the league this season, there's a lot of familiar faces that will be rocking a new crest on their chest. So what is potentially a player for you that you think will make a familiar face that will make a huge impact with their new club?
I think you have to start with Christian Espinoza going from San Jose to Nashville, maybe one of the most underrated players in MLS the last few seasons because no one really talks about San Jose that much. A very talented winger going on a free transfer to Nashville. Just everyone around the league was bidding for this guy. And I think he's a great fit to go in there in Nashville with Mukhtar, with Surridge. I think he becomes one of the assist leaders in MLS this year, as he has been the last couple of years. I think he makes Nashville that much more dangerous. I think it puts Nashville in contention for the Supporter Shield for trophies this year. So I think Espinoza, for me, is one I definitely I think will have maybe the biggest impact of anyone that moved within the league. But I liked a lot of moves that happened within the league. Cole Bassett going to Portland I thought was a smart move, and Dane St. Clair to Miami as well.
Now, a lot of players did end up leaving MLS. What's a gap that you think has been left in one of the 30 MLS clubs that is going to be hard to fill?
Look, I kind of like actually DC United's offseason so far. I think they've done a nice job filling some holes, and I don't normally say that. I'm a DC guy. I root for them all the time because that club has so much history in that market. But replacing Benteke, it's going to be a very difficult task. They paid a lot of money for Baribo up top. Is that going to be enough to kind of do what Benteke has done for them the last couple of years? He was such an important outlet. He was the base of everything that they did. So that's one I think is going to be very tough to replace. And obviously we have to keep an eye on the Seattle Sounders as well. They're consistently challenging for trophies, but you have to replace Obed Vargas now in that midfield. What do they do to kind of make up for the loss of the best young player maybe that they've ever produced?
Yeah, how do you think they go about that, Paul? I mean, he's a massive loss. I don't think people knew how important he was over the last 18 months of that side.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at what Seattle's done over the last few years, they constantly look internally to replace him. So I don't think you're going to see Seattle make a lot of big splashes. I think they have belief right now in the system that they have, players that they're going to bring in and kind of encourage pushing younger players to step into those spots. I think Obed Vargas was not just about the style of play, right? I think there was something about the fact that he was a homegrown player and the emotion that he carried. I think back to that Leagues Cup final and how he didn't back down from Messi, right? Even a lot of players are intimidated by somebody of that stature, and Obed Vargas wasn't. And that's really what stood out to me. So I think it puts some importance on some of the leaders of that team, Christian Roldan obviously being one of them. And I think we'll see Hassani Dotson play a lot of minutes to replace Obed Vargas, who's a player who, has had some really good moments in Major League Soccer and now is going to be asked to kind of step into a team and help them transition right away. And I think he could be a name that surprises as well this year.
Paul, we appreciate the analysis. How are you going to be taking in all of the games on opening weekend?
Yeah, Chicago's out of town this weekend, so I'll be on my couch. I actually like it more when I don't have to go to the stadium because I can watch more games. So I'll just be watching as many as I can. Obviously, the big marquee matchup tomorrow night between Son and Messi. Hopefully, Messi plays at the Coliseum. I think it'll be great for the league. It's a great matchup to start the season. So a little bit of popcorn, maybe a beer, and a lot of MLS tomorrow.